Things have been lost, that's for sure. Redwood Academy is gone. And any of you from Redwood Academy? Any of friends that went to Redwood Academy? Their high school students are going to be going over to Rio in Healdsburg, and then the K through 8, I guess, are going to go to the Santa Rosa Church. And the outfit of the church as a school while they rebuild the thing. Any of you find your way up to the airport to look at the helibase while it was functioning? Isn't that something? It's amazing. My wife and I start our run by parking at the airport, just at the south extension of the runway, and then walk in and start running at window. And the tail end of the run comes up the hill at the far north part of Pusey's property, and then comes along first west of the runway, and then around the north end of the runway, and then parallels it. And during the height of the whole battle, we were wearing our N95 masks and looking at those helicopters coming in and landing and everything. When they land, there's a place you could be on the trail where you can't even stand up. The wind is so strong. It was amazing. It was more than 20 helicopters just coming and going as fast as they could. Great big ones too, big Chinook types with the rotors at the front and the back. Man, scary business when something just burns through. Can you imagine if it was 3,000 years ago and people's entire community just burned? There's no cell phones. There's no sheriff's deputies to come and knock on the door and say, evacuate, mandatory evacuation. There's no sirens. If fire just came through a whole community. I mean, think about the area in Santa Rosa that had about, I don't know what, 1,000 homes in a neighborhood, and the whole development, the whole part of town burned right to the ground. Burned right to the ground. It even jumped 101 to burn the Kohl's store, and all those little fast food places there, the Arby's and the Taco Bell and the McDonald's there by the Kohl's, gone, just burned right out. But imagine, how would people explain that fire came and burned their entire community, just gone, killed them all? What would people tend to say if somebody from the community had been, say, on a hunting trip 20 miles away, and then when they returned, there was ashes and nobody? How would they explain to themselves what had occurred? They would have come up with things to say. Neighboring communities would have said things. Imagine people, if there were, say, communities 10 miles away that were in conflict with the community that burned. They might have actually routinely been praying that their gods would smite and do smiting. Imagine what they would say when it happened. How it could reinforce their belief in what they already had faith would happen, and then it happened. People, in grappling with disruptions, in grappling with tragedy, people have a tendency to sort of think outside their regular ways of thinking and try to explain how could this have happened. Obviously, it came from outside somehow, and this was done to us, and there's nothing we can do to control it. There's nothing we could do to control it here. Was there? I mean, that fire was just going. There was no controlling it. I listened to the scanner, to the fire scanner and the law enforcement frequencies, and they were repeating, the dispatchers and incident commanders were repeating at intervals Your priority is saving lives. Your priority is staying alive and saving lives. It's just safety is all we can do, is just evacuate people and stay out of areas that don't look like you're going to be able to get out of them once you get into them. They were telling them, don't try to put out buildings that are burning. Don't try to put out forest fire. We don't have enough people to do the evacuations. Don't divert any manpower. Just try to get people evacuated. Basically, there was nothing they could do to save anything anyway, because it was a wall of fire. So when that happens, people are going to come up with some way to explain it, because they need to grapple with whether or not it's something that's going to happen again. They need to know, can we ever be safe, or is this world an unsafe place? When something like that maybe had not happened in the combined memory of a people group, and then it does happen. Or the earth moves and knocks things down and kills people. How in the world do people understand what it means when the earth is shaking? Somebody shook it. So there's attempts to explain these things. Many of those kinds of explanations, and many of the things that come about pro-socially to try to help and sympathize with other people and combine resources. You see all the efforts that people are collecting socks and underpants and canned foods and furniture and that sort of thing, trying to give it to people and trying to help set up places to. People are giving, even when they can't meet their own economic goals, when they're far from meeting their own. Even people that are way in debt are going further in debt to help somebody to at least get to where their life is livable with some equipment and some clothes and that sort of thing. Why? Why are people doing that? What motivates people to want to help other people like that when they get a tragedy like this? Why are they doing that? Those questions also become a matter of many people's religion. When we think about being religious, we think about how we behave toward other people sometimes. We think about explaining things that are hard to understand, especially the ones that are related to tragedies, that we wanted some idea. If we stop doing certain things, would we not get this to happen again? Is there any way we could stop? Are we blaspheming and we're not realizing it, and somebody's mad, so they're shaking the earth or they're sending fire? What do we do so our community doesn't burn down like the neighboring community? The answers to some of those kinds of questions have associated themselves with many people's religions. By way of review, let's remember that the difference between a person's religion and the rest of their entire culture, or how they do life as a people, it's not always the same amount of difference. It's not like we say, well, somebody's got this kind of religion, well, I don't care, as long as they're a good fireman. I don't care whether they're a Baha'i, I don't care whether they're a Muslim, or they're a Pentecostal Christian. I don't care about any of that stuff when they show up as a paramedic and my dad's having a heart attack and they're down there doing CPR. I don't care. It doesn't make any difference. They can take care of that on whatever day they go to church. But right now, they're just doing their job. So we think of that as not mattering. For some people, if you sent somebody to do CPR on a loved one, it might even be a matter of their religion whether they let that person touch their family member, depending on what their religious belief says about that kind of person. There have been times, and there are still some people in some parts of India, that if somebody came to help somebody and they were an untouchable, touching on a Brahmin, they would have them die rather than let them touch like that intimately to try to save their life. People in this country sometimes will not accept a certain physician. Say they go to Kaiser and they're going to the emergency room at Kaiser because they've got this sort of problem. We have people right in our own country that would look at a person and their religion tells them not to let that person touch them and help them, and they would demand another physician. because of religious beliefs. There are religious beliefs that would cause a person to come to the doctor, and the doctor comes to help them, even to save their life or help them get out of pain, and based on their gender, their religion says that gender may not touch me. I don't believe in being touched by a person of that gender, and that is a religious notion for some people right in our country. The things that we are considering as we compare the religions that we look at this term actually are amplified. Some of the issues are amplified and brought to the fore by some of the kinds of issues that the people have been grappling with right now. If you were one of those people who had now lost everything, say your home was over in Santa Rosa, and say you were in bed asleep and you heard the sheriff bang on the door, and he said, "Get out," and you're supposed to just run. They won't even let you go back in to get your shirt on. And that is the case for some people. In fact, a woman that my wife taught school with in St. Helena, until year before last, when the woman retired, she was a band and choir teacher at my wife's school, and her husband he still is he's the librarian, the music librarian for the San Francisco Symphony. They live in Sonoma County. They were evacuated within just moments of being burned to death. And he was in his boxer pants with no shirt. And that's how he got in his truck with bare feet and drove. He had his keys right by the door. He didn't even get a robe. He got into the truck with his boxer pants and drove with bare feet. And at this moment, that truck and those boxer pants are his possessions in this world, because it burned it to the ground. Oh, take that back. Big old ash pile, and his grill, his hibachi, is standing there, not even singed. It's made to take heat. Even the red paint on the lid is looking just like it's ready from the store. And there it is, sitting up there, obscenely. A barbecue. I don't think he probably feels like barbecuing right now. I don't think he has the clothes for it. But if that happened to you, if you returned and you looked at a pile of ashes and everything you had is now gone, everything, all your memorabilia, all your family precious heirlooms if you have any, all your clothes, all your books, computer, your bed linens, your wash rag, the bottle of mouthwash that's halfway used, it's all gone. Everything gone. And most people don't have insurance for it. It's just plain gone. And in some cases, when people's houses burn, it destroyed their career because they had things in their home that they need to do what it is that they do. Gone, you know. So when that happens, we start to get into a certain mood that causes us to start having different kinds of thoughts, to try to say things like, why would this happen to me? Why does this have to happen? For those of us that didn't have it happen, some of you and me have had certain thoughts this week when things have gone not the way we prefer. And am I the only one that when some things have been just not my first choice this week, I hear myself bitching and moaning about my woes, and then I think, wait a minute, there's people who lost family and their whole house. Many of you had that experience? You said, oh, why does it? And then you go, well, geez, I guess I should probably just tone it down until at least some time has gone by when people with real problems aren't just discovering their real problems. I had, last night, I was cleaning up my glasses before I sat down and watched a Netflix thing with my wife, and I looked down and I've lost the nose piece on my glasses, and it's still lost. I'm going, that doesn't feel very good to put that on and have the metal touching instead of that little plastic pad that touches your nose. So I'm going, So I get the flashlight and look everywhere. No. Go look in the cars, go look in my office. Thinking, well, it happened outside somewhere, maybe when I was running or something. That's gone for good. And I'm in a mood to really swear about that. And then I sit down and eat something, and I bite down on what I'm eating. I thought it was going to be soft, and it was hard. And there's already a repair here. And so in an instant, I'm going, why does my tongue now go through my teeth when they're closed? I thought, well, it's Halloween time. If I sit still, people are going to they're going to take out my brain and put a candle in my head because now I've got this big old jack-o'-lantern chip in my tooth. So I had to go this morning to the dentist and have them glue my mouth back together. So I'm standing there for a moment with my Halloween tooth and my glasses crooked on my nose, and I had this wave of temptation to swear and say, what the heck? Why couldn't something go right? And then I'm remembering that there's people I know who've lost everything, and we also have lost dozens of lives. People's animals are dead, that they cared a lot about. There's my dog, he's doing fine. Our house is intact. We were moaning about not having electricity for part of the week, and then the water was off. That wasn't my favorite thing. But the whole thing, you look at what other people have going and say, shoot. It's really common when something heinous happens, when you go to church, to hear from the people that are going to have prayer or from the pastor, depending on what church you go to. It's really not that uncommon to have people thanking God that that wasn't us. Thanking God for His wonderful protection. And I don't know about you, but when they do that, it really gets to me because it's like, well, what about those people? What makes us, why was God protecting, why are we thanking Him for protecting us when He couldn't, was He busy with me and He couldn't help them? Maybe I should get a turn too or something, It bothers me. I'm not even sure what the right answer is to it theologically, but it always grates on me when I hear people talking about how blessed we are in the context of talking about someone else having their lives ruined, or losing their kids, or whatever, or having their country devastated by. It happened with the Japan earthquake and tsunami and the nuclear disaster. Next time I went to church, people were going on and on about how grateful we are that God protected us. And it's very difficult for me to do that. But many people have a kind of local notion of their deities. They have the idea that they're somehow special, that it's us. And we have our God, and God, it's too bad those people don't have our God to take care of them. And it's very difficult, even in our own religion, it's very difficult to completely avoid the notion that when someone else is trying to worship their God, we have this idea that if they use a different name for that God, or their culture is very different and their kind of worship is very different, but they picture God having different attributes, then we very commonly have the idea that they're not worshiping God, that they're worshiping something else, play-like, or worse, some demonic element. That's a challenge when we're looking at other people's religion, because if that is what we carry, that's a baggage we carry, and we're sure of that, then when we're looking at the way they relate to their deity, we're judging that and storing that information in a different context than if we were looking at somebody as a fellow human being trying to understand things like we're trying to understand things, trying to reach out to whoever it is that created us and whoever might have some sort of plan for keeping things going like they are now, with some sort of respect and even admiration for the way that they've done it, the way we would want them to be respectful, and even, as a fellow human being, fond of the answers we've come up with. Now, it's hard to say that without scaring people, and without people thinking that you're moving away from your own faith. if you allow for any kind of tolerance or legitimacy for somebody else's religion, it seems to many people scary, like you're backsliding or you're becoming heathen. Do you perceive that at all in your own religious tradition? So it's very hard to study something when what you believe you're studying is pure evil. We're even more prejudiced against other people's religions than we are against things that are not religious, even if those things are diametrically opposed in their values. You could take somebody else's religious faith, and they are advocating the same kinds of things that Jesus advocated, saying that's the best way to live, and because they're worshiping in another religion, we feel very much worse about them than we do about somebody and something that is secular, that is pure evil, that's selfish. We should hold that in mind, but we need to figure out what's going on with the people who are against others and who say if it's not like us, then they're somehow always wrong. I'm going to suggest that if you have come from any religious tradition, and my religious tradition is Seventh-day Adventism, as is PUC's, as an official entity, doesn't matter. You could come from something else too. You could be a Buddhist. You could be from another Christian denomination. You could be from some religion that has come about that sees itself as Gnostic or modern mysticism or something like that. Doesn't make any difference. What I'm going to diagram on the board is applicable to any religious group and not just religious groups. But I'm going to draw a circle, and then I'm going to say that if we could take every conceivable existing or past historic religion, we could have a little representation of that religion as like a slice of this pie. Okay? Now, in the middle, I'm going to put a little circle like that. And then we're going to go right to here. And we'll just pretend that what we're talking about here is Seventh-day Adventism. Okay? But around here you can put whatever you want. So we'll just put, we're talking about the Adventists here, okay, in this little wedge. But in every one of these, in every place we could put Catholics here. And we could put some Baptists here, and on around. We could go outside of Christianity, and we could do Buddhism. We could do Hinduism. We could have like shamanic traditions, various ones. They're different. Whole section. Those of you that come from a church will recognize that there are some people in the church right now, especially if it's an Adventist church, that are starting to remind everybody about the origins of Halloween, for instance. If you go on Facebook, you can find some of the people from your home church that are putting something like, "This ex-Satanist's wonders out loud why it is that anybody who considers themselves any kind of Christian would actually trick or treat or put on a costume and have a pumpkin, or whatever." Those people also, if you tell them you're studying world religions, there's a number of those kind of people that would say, "So you're studying evil. You're just studying all the different flavors of heathenism. Why would you study the enemy? You don't need to study the enemy, you study truth." Those people, if you subject your lifestyle to their critique, how would they describe your lifestyle? The people that I'm characterizing, what would they say about your lifestyle? Anybody? If somebody is uber conservative and you're not, and you ask them to describe how you are in terms of your holiness.
I feel like I probably don't even go in the house.
So you may be lost.
A heathen.
Huh?
A heathen.
So you might be a heathen. You're a bad Adventist, maybe. Yes.
I think we should see with somebody that they can help.
Somebody that they can help because they've got more light than you do, and they need to, they need to be patient with you and work with you until you understand it as clearly as they do, right?
Bad influence?
Bad influence. You're a bad influence. They don't want you playing with their kids or dating their kids.
Rebel? Rebel?
Oh yeah, you're rebellious.
You're not Christian.
You're not really a Christian. So, if you have those kind of people, I'm going to suggest that those kind of people would be right here. And I'm going to call them conservatives. Okay? The way that we use the term conservatives in Adventism. It's not the same thing as a political conservative. Like, are you a Republican or a Democrat or progressive or whatever? It's not exactly the same. But we have people like that in all of these groups. Now, notice that where I've placed them out here at this section, notice that I've made really big lines between that group and the next group. They have got borders. They defend their borders. They're very distinct about that. Notice also that I put a line here. That it doesn't just go forever this way. That it actually cuts off. You can get people who go that far, so far, that they actually consider the whole group that they were part of to just be they're all damned. And then they're completely off the wheel. You get people like David Koresh that leave sanity and get dangerous. And even the conservatives go, well, yeah, let's not go that far. They know to draw the line somewhere short of the lunacy and the kind of dangerous cultic thing. But a lot of them can get pretty close, and there's some sort of gray areas here. They start their own little institutions, and then the rest of the church is all in open apostasy, and maybe the Lord has forsaken that group. But as you go in, you come here in this area. You come to sort of the regular folk, sort of the medium group. And in that group, here, the sort of moderate types, moderates, here. In there, you have folk that are, they kind of think they probably should be more conservative. If the conservatives say something to them, they go, oh yeah, I know. You probably should stop eating cheese. You know what Ellen White said about cheese? Oh yeah, cheese. And then some of them say, you really probably shouldn't even be in like breakfast strips and linkettes and things like that because, they're really not the Edenic diet. You should be eating fruits and nuts and things. You're dressing not really that modestly. You need to dress in dresses that are made out of drapery material and things like that. And the, reform dress goes to here. And so the moderates look at these guys and go, those guys are really intense. They really put their money where their mouth is, and so they have this sort of, when they look at them, they get a little guilty feeling going, But nevertheless, it doesn't change that much. They might say, yeah, we're going to dabble in some of this stuff, but then they're back out here, And then these people will say, we'll talk to some of these people and say, did you really go to Denny's on Sabbath? And they're going, yeah, dang, I probably shouldn't have done that. So then these guys kind of act like a super ego for these guys. Then you move in here, and you get people who even make some of the moderates uncomfortable. They want to do whatever kind of rap music in church, and they want to, all bets are off in terms of whatever lifestyle things and that sort of stuff. And they're going, well, over here they're going, I'm gonna date this Baptist, and these people are going, yeah, maybe that's not a good idea. And these guys are saying you're gonna grow horns. So in here you got your more liberal types. And they're kind of like, yeah, well, I'm good with all this other stuff, kind of. And they may be saying, yeah, other people's beliefs are legitimate. If I move somewhere and I don't like the Adventist church, but I do like what's going on in another church, I'll probably go to that one. There's a better youth group or a better kids group for my children or whatever. And I don't worry about it. It's all, the Lord sees my heart. And so you got people that are fairly liberal, and they don't let their religion really mess with their lifestyle too much. If it gets in the way of what they want to do, it's like, well, yeah, I probably should do that, but no, we're saved by grace. And so you should, if you're involved with any religious group, you probably have some feeling for this kind of thing. Sometimes you see some of the old grandpa and grandma people that are more conservative, and some of the young people that want to have things different and progressive. But it doesn't always fall along age lines. But in here, when you get to there, you get to a point where people kind of transcend the whole thing. There's some people there that everyone there would say, well, yeah, they're the real deal. The conservatives look at them and go, yeah, I think those guys might work miracles. And they might. Because in the middle, when somebody goes to a certain point, it gets off the scale, and it's not just on a continuum anymore. They have this transcendent thing. You can meet somebody and you can they don't have to say anything. You can just say, wow, all I can say is I experienced some sort of holiness with that person. You can meet somebody and you can watch the way they do and hear their attitudes about other people and how they live and their priorities, and you go, well, that's an exception. They're off the scale. They've got their own thing going. You meet them and your priorities change for the time that you're with them. It's just a completely different thing when you meet somebody that's really a holy person. When they really take it, not like going all the way with it, but going beyond. We speak of people, and in Adventist tradition, we speak of people like Enoch, who in the genealogies in the Old Testament, it says, and Enoch had his son, and then he lived a certain number of years, and then he walked with God, and he was not, for God had taken him. And we say, well, he just sort of started living in heaven while he was here. Period. And when Jesus was here, according to our tradition, that was heaven on earth. To just be with him was just heaven on earth. These people are the saints. These people that are martyred and that sing sweet hymns and are just trying to beg for the forgiveness of the people that are torturing them. And we're going, well, that's another level. Have you ever met somebody, ever in your life, that when you're with them, it's a whole different game? They're just, you'd have to just say, I think that was a real holy person. Have you ever met anybody like that? You can't describe them as conservative or liberal. But I'll guarantee you, whatever other people were into, that person you're thinking of had room for those other people. And love. And no criticism. No judgment. Just love and acceptance. And you had the notion that that person somehow was connected with divinity. And that it made a difference to how you perceived them relating to you. And they didn't argue with you and try to prove you wrong. And I guarantee you they didn't compete with you in any way, shape, or form. You never felt like they were trying to compete with you, and you had no notion to compete with them. Because they were an exception. Those kinds of exceptions exist in every one of these traditions. You can meet a Catholic priest. I do not care how conservative you are. You can be off the deep end even. But you can find people that have been Catholic priests, and when other people listen to them, they're going, yeah, that's the straight stuff. You can find Adventist people scattered around that when you're with them, it's such a pure little slice of heaven, and you just know, okay, that's a saint. That's a saint. If you gather those kinds of people, have you ever listened to the Dalai Lama? You ever listened to the current Dalai Lama of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition? You ever listened to him speak and seen how he treats people? I would encourage you to do that and see what feeling you get. There was a man who's passed now, but he was the one who started the Adventist ministry, the Voice of Prophecy. HMS Richards Sr., the first. And I never met him, but I've met a lot of different kinds of people, Adventist and other, that have met him, that had met him when he was living. And they said, you just had this feeling that he loved you more than his own life, and everything he said gave you hope. One time he was at an annual council. There's been a lot of discussion this last couple of weeks about annual council. Some of you might have caught some of that on Facebook. They're talking about the fact that there's a bunch of political horse manure coming down from the top at the fall council. People are taking positions on the way that the General Conference president and some henchmen are trying to think of how to use some sort of power or authority to convince the union conferences that are ordaining women that they're going to get punished and they're going to be sorry, they're going to do away with their unions or whatever. And so they're trying all these political things. Well, that's not a brand new thing. There's always silliness with all political processes. You always get a bunch of stench. So it's just people always kind of act like that. Well, one time, HMS Richards was at Fall Council, and they were arguing some point, and theologians and BRICOM and everybody was there, and they were trying to prove somebody wrong and posturing to get this office and that office and everything. And after the first morning of meetings, which had been particularly contentious, they've been battling about something and acting very unchristlike through the whole thing. And so, dinosaur old Elder Richards is taking himself to where they're going to feed lunch, when they let the morning session out. And somebody stopped and said, Elder Richards, what did you think of the morning session? And he said, oh, it was wonderful. I got all the way through Mark and 3/4 of the way through Matthew. He had found something that was transcendent for him. He just opened it up and started reading the Gospels. It was like, oh yeah, this doesn't concern me. So all he experienced was just a wonderful time. I'm just glad to be with everyone I got, almost halfway through the Gospel. Just there was no way to get a negative word out of him. He just didn't have a negative word. He wouldn't resist anything. He wouldn't argue and try to disprove anybody. If you take people like that, I don't care who they are, they can be a nun like Mother Teresa, or they can be the Dalai Lama, or they can be HMS Richards, or they could be Mrs. White, or they could be that person you had in mind when you were saying, yeah, I am acquainted with an authentic saint. if you take those people and you put them here, they've got their people that know who they are in their own traditions. And they know their traditions, and they're comfortable everywhere in this little section of their tradition. But they're in the middle. It's very hard to tell the difference between those people, no matter where their home base is. It's very, very hard to hear any difference in their teachings or see any difference in their attitudes. Very, very different. There's some point at which mystics are indistinguishable from one another. There's little subtle differences. People are always, they're not right in the center, but they're in a zone where they sound so very similar to each other, no matter what tradition they come from. And funny thing is, if you take one of them from anywhere and put them anywhere so that people don't know who they are, they're going to perceive them as their kind of people. They're going to perceive them as holy because they're holy. You might have complained about these kind of people when they said that your youth group had to stop doing whatever it is you were hoping to do, or whatever worship you wanted style wasn't going to happen, or you might have heard controversies like that. Or when they're criticizing what you want to do in your lifestyle and they're going, no, you're not doing that. Maybe you have parents that you consider more, or grandparents that you consider more conservative than you are. Is there anybody here that there's certain things that you would do, but you're not going to go do it with your grandma? It's like, no, that's not, we don't bother grandma with that. We don't even have that discussion with grandma, right? Or grandpa. And you would feel like, well, I would do that, but I wouldn't do that in front of them because I don't want to offend them, you know. When they're not your beloved grandparents, you can get really torqued with these kind of people. They can really, sometimes they're power hungry and they're trying to run the church. And they're quick to remind everybody that they're the only ones that are actually contributing anything and keeping PG&E paid and paying down the mortgage on the building. So if you don't have them, you're not even going to have a church, so you go play somewhere else. But it's interesting, if you didn't have these people, I argue that you would not have your church. Not just because of the bills being paid, but because those people are trying to find ways to give a definition, a distinction for our church or for whatever church or whatever group. If we didn't have them, we would have a very hard time having even a semblance of the definition. Now, we've experimented in here with how hard it is to define something like religion. It's a very difficult thing to define that. And it's very difficult to define little parts of it also, even if you define a divinity or you define being nice. It's very hard to get a definition of it. But if I said, what is a Seventh-day Adventist? There's a difference between a Seventh-day Adventist and something else. What is a Seventh-day Adventist? What kinds of answers would you give me if I asked you, what is a Seventh-day Adventist? Yes?
The church that we
Okay, it's a church. What?
the church go to worship on Sabbath.
A church that goes to worship on Sabbath. Okay. Pardon? He took yours, meaning. The three angels' message. Okay, Romans 12:13, that kind. I mean, Revelation 12:13, Babylon has fallen, and all of that, right? So that doctrine, that set of doctrines.
Ellen White,
So there is a special body of revelation that the church claims.
the Trinity.
Believes the Trinity in common with many other Christian groups. A whole notion of some different lifestyle practices related to health. Yes, the health message. What else?
The state of the dead.
Different belief on what happens to us when we die.
Daniel, the prophecy.
Okay, like Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 and 8 and the little horn and all of that, which is related to the three angels' message. 1844, 2300 days, 1260 days, right?
Million days.
Yes.
The creation story.
A belief about where we come from, origins. Genesis 1 and 2.
Are we talking about the,
Seventh-day Adventists.
what do you identify them with?
What?
Oh, okay.
We're just, how we define them. How do you say, what is a Seventh-day Adventist?
Second time.
Okay, Advent. That's where we get the term Adventist.
Views on like alcohol and sex.
There you go. Lifestyle issues for intoxicants and stimulants and for our sexuality.
Oh, Jesus is God's son.
Okay, the whole way we interpret the Trinity and Jesus' divinity and everything.
And the days.
Eschatology, yes, the last days and how we see that all playing out. We already covered diet. The millennium, yes. The whole timetable of getting from this age to sort of a permanent heaven age, yes. Okay, salvation. Atonement, the doctrine of the atonement.
The remnant.
The notion of the remnant. Clean and unclean meat. Let's expand that to Levitical, following Levitical codes in picking and choosing. Because that one isn't actually, we don't do that as a health thing, we do that as a defilement thing, actually.
Great controversy.
The notion of the great controversy. Yes, that is that's our theosophy.
The Ten Commandments.
The notion of the Ten Commandments.
Ellen White.
We already said Ellen White.
Woman in church.
What about them?
About whether or not they can hold positions and then like.
Okay, we've got people that are trying to do that. It isn't a church teaching, but the people are giving it definition, and that relates because we're talking about the conservatives.
And the second resurrection. The second resurrection.
Okay, the notion of the second resurrection. Yes.
Spiritual gifts and ministries.
Somebody's got the 28 in front of her. Spiritual gifts and ministries. Someone found the 28 fundamental beliefs.
That Jesus or God is coming soon.
Got that one.
Oh,
Advent.
Baptism by submersion.
Uh-huh. Yes. Full immersion baptism.
The focus on just extra studying and interpreting the Bible.
Yes. Yes, definitely. Yes, there's things about marriage in actually family and the whole 9 yards.
Heaven on the new earth.
The new earth. That's right.
Something about a probationary period.
The close of probation.
Yeah.
And while the angels are still holding back the winds of strife. Yes. Now, let's be really honest. Those of you that consider yourselves Adventist, do you adhere to all of those? Do you agree with every one of those and you adhere to it? I can't tell you how many times among Seventh-day Adventist students, occasionally even theology majors, I have heard people say, when we've lost somebody in our campus community, that they're looking down on us and really appreciating what we're doing to memorialize them. That is really common among young Adventists, to actually think, well, I think they might be there still, up in heaven. I hear Adventists, young and liberal Adventists, talking about people that are up in heaven or that are looking down on us all the time.
One of my friends brought up the question, at what point do you disagree with the fundamental belief so much that you can't call you can't call yourself an Adventist anymore?
That is a great point. That's a great point. At what point do the definitions of Adventism just not quite apply to you to the point that you can say, there's some things that I affiliate with them, and Because some people have a different notion about what their Adventism is. Yes, I'm Adventist. Why? Well, I was born into it. I went to Adventist schools. I feel comfortable in that worship, but other worship creeps me out or whatever. But I don't really go to church. But still, I'm an Adventist. Like I'm a Kurtz. I mean, you could go for 30 years without seeing your family, but they're still your family. And you do. What's your last name? You tell people your last name. Say, what is your family? And you list the people that are in your family. So by some definitions, we say, well, just by affiliation. But by affiliation, you don't have any definition. All you have is a roster. And that is not, the roster doesn't have any structure. It's just a list. Like, hey, let's form a club of what? Cool people. Cool people that are our kind of people. Let's just have a list. So membership. Well, how do you get into it? You say a bunch of things that you believe, and then you don't really believe it, but you have to say it once, and then you join, and then you don't have to believe anything after that, right? Or do anything any different. Do you think? Oh, is there nobody here who's Adventist? But you're going to say, well, yeah, but I'd like a little bacon on my sandwich. People celebrate bacon like it's their religion now with more enthusiasm than a lot of Adventists celebrate their Adventism. I mean, there's memes that go on Facebook, and I look at it, and it's people here that are Adventist people I see in church and everything, and then they're putting, like, everything's better with bacon and things like that. I'm going, that is pig, all y'all. Hey, good morning. Is that not pig meat? What about Leviticus 11? And I don't need to ever eat any pork. I'm not doing that. Now, interesting. Adventists, by definition, we don't eat pork. And we give the text of Leviticus 11 that says we're not to eat these foods where the land animals do not both divide the hoof and chew the cud. But the same list of what we don't eat also says we don't eat the blood of any animal. But Adventists who eat meat all eat blood. They do not eat kosher meat. There are very few Adventists that say, oh, I eat, but it's going to have to be kosher. It has to be killed a certain way, so the blood is all drained. And then it's even more. If there's any blood, it violates Leviticus the same way that pork does, or clams, or oysters, or whatever bottom-feeding silliness people are eating. But people eat the blood. But now if you talk to these people, they're going to say, well, I can fix that for you. God's people should have abandoned the use of flesh foods. And in the last days before Jesus comes, they will. That's what Ellen White says. You say, but do you have chicken sometimes? Well, sometimes. And you know who did? Like, even toward the end of life? Ellen White. Ellen White did not did not become vegan. It didn't happen. I mean, there's documentation that even in the last parts of her life, she did, when she felt like it, she'd get some meat and eat it. You know how I know that? I was shown her grocery account from the St. Helena store where she bought it in health science class at PUC. Because they actually obtained it. So, no. And one time when they were taking a trip, she and Willie, a train trip, you know this one, don't you? She said, I want venison.
Oh, yeah.
And so he had to go off and shoot a deer because she was just saying, I'm having venison. And she had venison. So, all these, this really is uncomfortable for these folk to have this conversation, and they'll just say, uh-uh. Don't say that. That's satanic. You're just wrecking it all. You're wrecking the joint. But at what point of I do what I want on Sabbath, and it's pretty much the same thing as on Friday and Thursday and Tuesday, at what point do we say, well, yeah, I don't know, Jesus might come. I don't know. I think probably, I'm not sure about all that. And I think my grandma, I think she can see me. And, okay, so I live with my girlfriend. And we live together like we're married, but we're not married. And it's not permanent, but, or I have people that I have relationships with just playmate, just to relieve stress at this age, because heck, adolescence starts, at 8th grade or something, or 6th grade or whatever, and goes into how old are we supposed to be when we get married? So you would expect we're like half dead and don't work anymore by the time we do get married. So don't give me that now. So with all these things that people have, at what point are they really not Adventists anymore? So these people, though, I contend, if these people did not overemphasize the definitions, I think the notion, the concept of the group would disappear. I think, and I might be wrong, I don't really think I could prove it anyway, and I don't think anyone has proven it, but I have a hunch that without those people, we wouldn't even have our group. And I think that we need to, if we're not at that point, if we're someplace else in our practices or our beliefs or whatever, but we say, yeah, but I really like that there's an Adventist group. I'm an Adventist, and I really appreciate that we have this thing, and we have colleges like PUC, and we have student missionary programs, and we have mission programs, and I can travel somewhere else, and I know I can just call up another Adventist. I could be in some country I've never even heard the name of, but if I say, get me to an Adventist, they're going to go, we're family. We can have things in common. I know how to navigate those people. No matter what their other culture, we're family. I don't want anything happening to that. I like that. I like our church. I love our church. If you could say that with me, I think that if we're being intellectually honest, we would say, no matter how frustrated any of us ever become with these folk, and no matter how judgmental and unchristlike they can even be sometimes, and they're not always, but often they are, some of these people are very unchristlike also. And some of these people, none of these people are very, very, very Christ-like. But I don't think without these people being dogmatic that we would actually still have an Adventist church. Including fighting over issues that are not even biblical. A lot of our beliefs aren't really biblical, but they're still important. There's nothing in the Bible that says you cannot smoke cigarettes. That's nonsense. There's nothing that says you can't smoke pot. And there's definitely nothing in the Bible that says you can't drink alcohol. But I think we should not be drinking alcohol. I think we should not be smoking weed, and I think we should not be smoking tobacco. I'm really committed to that. I really think that alcohol, for instance, I really think is one of the most damnable, asinine things that hurts more people. You know all this people putting Me Too on their site and everything? For the last week after that jerk in Hollywood has been accused for the 90 millionth time of harassing somebody sexually. All that Me Too stuff. If you took alcohol out of the picture, do you know how many less Me Toos there'd be? You think about it. You think about the vast number of people that should have been good to a little person, and instead they exploit that little person. And those people, you tell me how many of those occasions involved alcohol. Darn near all of them. Because most people maintain a pretty healthy incest taboo until you anesthetize it, and then everything looks good. You put on your beer goggles, and people you have no business, then they're Kennedys. I think it causes more hurt than any other single thing I can think of in our culture. It's damnable and satanic. Does the Bible say that you cannot drink alcohol? I do not believe it does. But I would say that the guidance our church has sounds inspired to me about alcohol, just by way of example. Now, there's people here that are arguing to maintain things that I think they're wrong. I mean, I'll say straight up that I think that because when somebody says that because my daughter was born a daughter instead of a son, if she wanted to be a pastor, she has to have some second place. That's nonsense in my book. I don't believe anyone can take the Bible without perverting logic or what it says and prove that. All they can do is argue on the basis of culture and authority, which we don't recognize, which we actually reject foundationally as a people. That's why we're Protestants. That says we don't recognize papal kinds of authority, and tradition has absolutely no authority. That's what it is in Adventist lore to be a Protestant. And so, even though I disagree with people's position on some of these issues, I don't think that if we didn't have those people arguing dogmatically and demanding their way, I think we might fall apart. Because we wouldn't otherwise bother to maintain a definition to where we draw a line and say this is an Adventist and this isn't an Adventist. And that's not unique to Adventism. I think it's true also. I think Catholics would cease to exist, and so would Baptists, and so would Buddhists. Maybe not Hindus. Maybe not Hindus, but maybe Hindus. Maybe different sects. S-E-C-T-S, not S-E-X-S. Sects of Hinduism. But Hinduism it differs from Adventism and Catholicism in terms of central authority. And when a region has a certain local religious flavor to it, or they are worshiping some other manifestation of God, Hinduism has a mechanism logically in its philosophy to say, okay, well, that's how God is manifesting to this group. That's how they're relating to God. That's fine. God's putting on that costume for them, and this costume for me, and this costume for the other people. And so it's a little more open like that. But not everybody is. Time to pass that around. Good. In terms of the people in the middle that are mystics, and this is, now we're going away from the academic religious study of other people's beliefs to making some very bold spiritual statements. It is my belief that you and I can make a choice to pursue going to the middle of that circle and being holy. It is my belief that if you read what Jesus said, it's exactly what he commanded us to do. But it's not necessary to go to heaven. You don't have to do that in order to be saved. But he certainly encouraged people to do it. It doesn't get you saved to do it. And this is bizarre, but it doesn't have anything to do with just not going to hell. It has something to do with you don't have to wait until some time after this life to start experiencing heaven. You can live in heaven right now. You can move to the middle of that circle and make it so that when somebody thinks about you or meets you, they say, all I can say is, I experience holiness. So that when you're with somebody, you don't have to say a word. They sense something, even though you're not even focused on them. Just by being with you, they sense something holy and move towards you, and strangers will say, would you bless me or say a prayer for me? You can absolutely pursue that. In fact, that is Seventh-day Adventist teaching. And Ellen White says that it's wrong to just have some list of famous old celebrities, religious celebrities that are the saints. She says, when we accept Christ and we're letting the Spirit sanctify us in our hearts, we are the saints. We're saints. And we're holy, and we need to live like it. That doesn't mean just don't do fun things and don't eat anything and keep your pants up. It goes way further than something like that. It means that you can actually have such direct communion, define your very consciousness that it's detectable by people who don't even know you, if you're even anywhere near it. And I'll make a really bold statement. Rather than just saying, hey, this is my belief, I'll say it like this. I promise you that that's true. And I can even tell you what to do to get it. I can even not just like, well, you know, say the right incantation. No, I mean, I can actually give you, hey, do this, and you'll be pursuing it. If you have an interest in that, you can move toward being there. And I'll make another statement that's going to sound really bizarre. That plate that I just drew, remember how we talked about how in our Western way of looking at things, our Western European way, we talk about religion as a separate entity? If you take this plate and instead of picturing it as like a pizza on a flat platter, if you picture it instead, take a spear like a ball, a big beach ball or something, and the religious thing is just slicing one way and taking a thin slice out. But if you just angle the knife differently and take another slice, you could have a whole other area of life, like art. Or another way, and you could have even like dance. Or you could do it another way, and you could have the study of physics. You could do it another way, and you could have anything you can think of that you can call an area of life. Martial arts. Marksmanship. Writing. Parenting. Romance.
What's the theme of today?
Theme of today is finding commonality among our groups that we're studying with our own. A dynamic that transcends and that is a common denominator.
So you said the center is holiness?
At the center is where the mystics are, the real mystics.